What if a moment of weakness revealed a secret so deadly that it threatened to destroy all you'd built? That night, I didn't just unlock a door. I unleashed a Pandora's box, and as my stepson intervened, the truth I'd been concealing was poised to forever change the course of our lives. This isn't only an error, it is a ticking time bomb. Please subscribe to my channel to receive more captivating real tales like this one. Additionally, don't forget to watch the entire video and leave a like, as this story promises to be quite entertaining. Please click the like button to express your support. I hadn't expected anyone to be home that night. The house was quiet. I had poured myself a glass of rich and crimson wine, dimly lit by the warm glow of a few scattered lamps and the rain outside pattering softly against the windows, and nestled into the seclusion of my chamber, a rare treat these days. Loneliness can creep in unexpectedly, doesn't it? Aaron, my spouse, had left. I was on another of his business trips, something I had gotten accustomed to, but this time I wasn't just lonely. I was restless, on edge in a manner I couldn't exactly describe. It was an aching that no amount of self-control could alleviate, so I made a secret decision. Something to fill the gap, if only for a little time. I had just started when I heard a faint noise outside my door. At first, I assumed it was the wind shaking the ancient frame or the house settling, as it frequently did, but then I heard it again. My heart accelerated, but I convinced myself it was nothing. My stepson Dominic had mentioned going out with friends earlier, and I had no reason to believe he'd return so soon, but I froze when I heard his gentle but close voice. "Bella, are you all right in there?" Panic overcame me. The room was black save for the dim glimmer of the TV screen. I tried with the remote, hoping to turn it off, but my hands betrayed me, quivering with desperation. The sound, the unmistakable, damning sound, rang louder than ever. Bella's voice appeared again, closer this time, before I could find the words to send him away. The door creaked open. I had not locked it. There he stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with astonishment. For a minute, neither of us moved, entangled in a web of astonishment and humiliation. I'm not sure what I expected him to do. Turn away? I expected him to laugh or say something scathing, but what I saw in his countenance was quite different. I was curious and suspected something was amiss. He sputtered, shifting his eyes between me and the television before fleeing away. It's not my fault I stumbled. Its only appearance is my face. My face burned as I searched for an excuse, but the words did not come. The tension in the room was oppressive, like a frail thread drawn taut and about to break. Finally, he cleared his throat and whispered, "I will let you. I should leave." But he didn't. Instead, he lingered for a bit longer, as if he couldn't bring himself to look away, and then something changed. It wasn't simply the humiliation or awkwardness, it was the silence. When the door closed and I was alone again, I knew neither of us would forget what had transpired. I sat there in quiet, the wine glass still held in my hand, my pulse racing in my chest, not from terror, but from something deeper, something I didn't want to define. I told myself that night that it was only a mistake, a fluke, but I knew better. Certain lines are irreversible, and Dominic's return home was just the beginning. I anticipated the same quiet, aloof boy I had met when Aaron and I married years before, but at 25, he wasn't a boy. He had a quiet confidence about him now, an effortless charm that I hadn't noticed before he'd matured into himself. Despite telling myself it was inappropriate to notice such things, I couldn't help but feel a pang of awareness whenever he was around. That awareness nagged at me after our first encounter. It wasn't only the shame of him catching me in such a vulnerable situation. It was the expression in his eyes, the interest, the way he paused, as if something about what he'd seen both fascinated and horrified him. I avoided him for the following several days, fleeing into the kitchen when I heard his footsteps, or claiming to be busy in the yard, but Dominic was eager to bridge the discomfort. One evening, he tapped on the kitchen door while I was washing dishes. "Hello?" he murmured, leaning casually against the frame. "I did not want to terrify you." The previous night, I kept my gaze fixated on the suds in the warm water, which was a wonderful distraction. "That's okay. I should have locked the door." "You don't need to explain," he replied swiftly. "I mean, everyone does deserve privacy." There was a moment of stillness before he said, "But you appeared disturbed. Are you okay?" The question took me off guard. It had been years since someone had asked me that question with genuine interest in the response. Aaron was frequently too distracted with work, and I'd long ago learned to hide my emotions under the facade of a perfect wife. "I'm fine. I apologize for my abrupt statement," which I later softened. "Thank you for inquiring." He nodded but did not move. His presence filled the little kitchen, and I felt the air between us change, charged with something unspoken. The tension did not release but persisted, wrapping around us in subtle, insidious ways. Over the following 2 weeks, Dominic and I developed a peculiar rhythm. He was more attentive than Aaron had ever been. He'd offered to assist me with tiny jobs such as bringing in groceries, fixing a broken faucet, or simply sitting with me on the porch as the sun set one evening while we drank a bottle of wine on the back deck. He shocked me with a question. "Do you ever get lonely, Bella?" I hesitated with the glass halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "Aaron frequently disappears, and it seems you don't have many people to converse with." His comments triggered a feeling within me that I was not previously aware of. "That is not true," I muttered defensively, shrugging his gaze steadily. "I am just saying, I'm there whenever you need someone to chat with or not talk to." His honesty was disarming. It wasn't pity, but understanding. It occurred again, late one night. I went downstairs to get a glass of water, only to discover Dominic seated in the living room, lighted by the brightness of the TV. He looked up as I arrived, and his expression softened when he spotted me. "I could not sleep," he asked. I shook my head, not wanting to accompany me. I hesitated, but eventually fell into the chair across from him in the stillness. The space between us felt comfortable at first, but then he turned off the TV and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He started talking about the other night, his voice low, and I tensed. "Dominic, we do not need to chat." He acknowledged that perhaps we don't need to chat, but I can't seem to stop thinking about it. Dominic stood and crossed the room to sit on the edge of the coffee table inches from me, causing my breath to hitch. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I believe you feel it as well." The weight of his words hang between us, unmistakable and terrible. I opened my lips to object, to tell him he was mistaken, but the truth betrayed me. I couldn't deny it anymore. That night was the first time we met. The line was unplanned and illogical, but it was unavoidable. The days after were a flurry of snatched moments and whispered promises. We convinced ourselves that our relationship was merely a fleeting affair, a temporary solution to fill the emptiness. But as our time together grew, it became increasingly challenging to maintain the illusion that it wasn't more. Dominic was exhilarating in a way that I hadn't felt in years. He made me feel visible, alive, and desired, but with each covert touch and long gaze, the risk increased. Aaron was coming home in a few weeks, and while we were cautious, the pressure of concealment began to grate on both of us. An unexpected guest, Alice Dominic, surprised us one afternoon as we were returning from a quiet trip to a neighboring park. Ex-girlfriend, she stood on the front porch, arms crossed, a mischievous smirk on her lips. "Dominic," she drawled, "long time no see." Her gaze lingered on me. Just a second too long, I felt an unsettling cold go down my spine. Alice Dominic inquired, his tone perfectly neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I thought I'd quit," she added pleasantly, yet her countenance revealed her ulterior objectives. "I've been thinking a lot about you." Her eyes darted between us as she talked, and I knew she was aware that this was the beginning of our unraveling. Alice's presence posed a threat neither of us had expected, and her cleverness was sharper than we thought. She had a talent for inquiring into topics that didn't interest her, and it wasn't long before she began asking questions that neither Dominic nor I wanted to answer. As the stakes increased, so did the anxiety as I attempted to preserve the appearance of a regular existence. Cracks began to show. Alice's reappearance had disrupted everything. Balance. Alice claimed her visit was spontaneous, yet everything she said felt calculated. Every time she looked at me, her gaze lingered on Dominic for an extra second. When she thought I wasn't looking, her grin had an edge that felt more like a warning, but Dominic and I attempted to go on as if she hadn't upset us. We told ourselves she was only a distraction, a remnant from his past, with no influence on the relationship we were forming. Nonetheless, her presence gnawed at me. A week later, Aaron called to inform me. Aaron was prolonging his business trip. His voice sounded distant, more focused on the task he had to manage than the woman. Waiting for him at home, he added, "I'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks." I advised him to take care of himself almost as an afterthought, in a calm and measured tone. Internally, I felt a sense of remorse. That night, a storm swept in. The rain fell in huge torrents, hammering on the roof and windows. Thunder roared in the distance, and the electricity flickered briefly before turning out. After completely darkening the home, I lit a few candles and attempted to relax with a book, but my nerves were on edge when I heard Dominic's voice calling from downstairs. "Bella, are you okay up there?" "There, I'm fine," I called back, just trying not to trip over anything a moment later. His flashlight beam lit the staircase as he climbed up to join me in the power company. "They said it might be a few hours," he said. "Mind if I hang out up here?" I hesitated. "Sure, if you don't mind the candles." He grinned. Better than sitting alone in the dark, we ended up sitting on the living room floor, sharing a blanket as the storm raged outside. Dominic had brought a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen, and we shared it between us, allowing its warmth to alleviate the chill. "Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing if you weren't here?" he asked suddenly. I frowned. "What do you mean if you hadn't married Aaron, if you weren't stuck in this house all the time?" The question startled me. Despite feeling hollow as I spoke, I didn't feel stuck. Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you Aaron? You are never here. Don't seem happy. I don't know. I think you deserve more than this." He added his voice softly. My heart twisted at his words. I wanted to correct him, telling him that I was perfectly content. But as I opened my mouth, the truth spilled out. I don't know what I'd be doing. I sometimes think about what my life would be like if I'd made different choices. But does it matter? Is my life? Dominic leaned closer, his expression soft but intense. It doesn't have to be. The air between us was heavy, charged with the same tension that had been simmering for weeks. I should have stopped it. His hand brushing against mine should have drawn me in, but instead I let it draw me in. I didn't pull back. In the days that followed, our stolen moments became more daring. Dominic and I found excuses to leave the house together. A trip to the farmer's market here, and a hike on a secluded trail. It wasn't just the thrill of being together. It was the way he looked at me like I was everything. It was the way he listened when I spoke. The way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, we ended up at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, and we sat in a booth tucked away in the corner, our knees brushing beneath the table. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I said. Stirring my coffee absently, Dominic tilted his head, studying me. "Why do you say that?" I said quietly. "This isn't who I am. I'm not the kind of person who does this." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Maybe you are. Maybe you just didn't know it until now." I wanted to believe him. Alice had not given up on us. Dominic told her we were family and nothing big was happening. One evening, as I was returning from the grocery store, I found her car parked outside the house. I walked in to find her in the living room with Dominic, her voice raised in accusation. "You're lying." She said to me, "I can see it all over your face, Alice. You're being ridiculous." Dominic spoke in a calm yet firm tone, and her gaze snapped to me as I walked in. "Part of this isn't you. What's going on between you two?" I forced myself to stay. "Calm, Alice. This isn't appropriate." "Oh, I think it's very appropriate," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think I don't know what's going on? I've seen the way you look at each other. Do you really think you can keep this a secret?" My heart pounded, but I refused to let her see me falter. "You're mistaken," I said evenly, "and I think it's time for you to leave." Alice's smile was sharp and cold. "Oh, I'll leave, but this isn't over." After Alice left, Dominic and I sat in silence. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. "She knows I said my voice barely above a whisper." "She doesn't have proof," Dominic replied, though he didn't sound convinced it doesn't matter. I said she's not going to let this go. Luke reached for my hand. "We'll figure it out together." His words were comforting, but the weight of guilt was growing heavier. By the day, every time I saw Aaron's face on a video call, every time I thought about the life I was risking, it became harder to justify what we were doing, and yet I couldn't stop Alice's threat from lingering over us like a storm cloud. She didn't have proof, but her sharp instincts and boldness made her dangerous, and Dominic, dear, sweet Dominic, believed that ignoring her would make her go away. "It's just talk," he assured me. One evening, he draped his arm over the back of the couch as we sat close together. "It's not just talk," I snapped, pushing away from him. "You didn't see her face." When she left, she knew Dominic was looking for a way to destroy us. "And what do you want me to pay her off?" His frustration flared, but it fizzled as quickly as it rose. "I'll hand her Bella, I promise." But I wasn't convinced Alice wasn't the type to be handled before. Dominic had a chance to act on his promise. Aaron came home early, 3 days ahead of me. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door creak open, followed by his heavy footsteps. My stomach dropped. Dominic was upstairs, and while there was nothing incriminating in the house, the sheer proximity of the two men made my pulse race. Bella Aaron's voice was rough due to his recent travels. I forced my tone to sound cheerful, wiping my hands on a dish towel as I turned to greet him. He stepped into the kitchen, setting his suitcase by the door. His face looked more worn than usual, the lines around his mouth deeper. I said, "You didn't tell me you were coming back early." I got through the meetings faster than I expected. His eyes scanned the room. Dominic's indirect question surprised me, as Aaron had never previously shown much interest in Dominic's movements. I think I carefully said, "He's upstairs." Aaron grunted and poured himself a glass of water. I saw Alice's car parked out front the other day when I called to check in. What's that about? Although my heart raced, I maintained a neutral expression. I didn't see her. Maybe she stopped by to talk to Dominic. Aaron nodded but didn't press further. Still, his mention of Alice left a sour taste in my mouth. It didn't take long for Alice to reappear one evening while Aaron was out running errands. I found her waiting on the front porch when I came home from a walk, her arms crossed, her eyes glinting with malice. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady as though she knew she had the upper hand. I considered ignoring her, but the determination in her stance told me she wouldn't leave without a confrontation. "What do you want, Alice?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could, and she smirked. She was direct, and I appreciated her pause before saying, "I want Dominic." Her words were sharp and unapologetic, and I believe I understood the direction of this, regardless of whether it's between the two of you. She continued, "It's not going to last, so why don't you step aside and let him come back to me?" I laughed bitterly. "Dominic is a grown man. He can make his own decisions." Her smile widened. "Of course he can, but how do you think Aaron would feel if he knew about your little arrangement, or the rest of the world for that matter?" My throat tightened. "You wouldn't." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "One small text, a picture here, a message there, and your idyllic life can crumble." That night, I told Dominic everything. "We have to stop her," I said. "If she tells Aaron, it's over for both of us." Dominic nodded, his jaw set. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand." But when he returned from their meeting the next day, his face was pale and his hands clenched into fists. "She's not backing down." He mentioned that she desires a substantial amount of money, which made my stomach turn. "How much?" "50,000, he said. She says it's for her silence." "We can't give her that," I said, pacing the room. "She'll just come back for more." Dominic stood abruptly, his frustration boiling over. "Then what do you suggest?" "Bella, I was at a loss for ideas and couldn't come up with a solution." Desperate, I turned to my closest friend Claire. She'd always been sharp and resourceful, and though I hated the idea of dragging her into this mess, I didn't see another option. When I told her the truth, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Bella," she said slowly, "do you understand the magnitude of the problems you're facing?" I said, "I didn't plan for this to happen." Tears welled up in my eyes. It just happened. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Okay, let's think this through. Alice is a problem, but she's not invincible. There has to be something we can use against her." It turned out there was. Claire dug into Alice's past, uncovering a trail of unpaid debts and a recent brush with the law. Armed with this information, we devised a plan to compel Alice's cooperation. The confrontation took place in a neutral location, a coffee shop on the edge of town. Claire and I waited at a corner table. The tension was palpable. When Alice arrived, she looked confident, almost smug. "I'm flattered," she said, as she slid into the seat across from us. "I didn't think you'd have the guts to face me. We've reached the conclusion of your game." Claire spoke as she slid a folder across the table. Alice opened it, her expression faltering as she took in the contents. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "That's not important," Claire said coolly. "We need to know who you are, and if you keep going, we won't hesitate to make this public." Alice's confidence cracked, but she recovered quickly. "You think this scares me? I may have stated that I have nothing to lose. However, Dominic and I both have something to lose, so let's be clear. If you walk away, we won't follow. We will find you, but if you talk to Aaron or anyone else, we will bring the truth out." For a brief moment, I thought she might call our bluff, but then she stood, the folder tightly clutched in her hands. "You'll regret this," she said, before storming out. Alice's departure should have been a relief, but it left behind a trail of destruction. Dominic and I were more careful than ever, but our consequences were unavoidable. Aaron began to notice the tension. His gaze lingered on me longer than usual. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Aaron asked, "Is there something going on?" "No," I said. "Quickly, why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You've been distant lately, and Dominic seems different too. I just hope everything's okay." For a few days after Alice left town, the guilt was suffocating, even though everything seemed calm. Dominic and I kept our distance while Aaron was home. We spoke only when necessary, careful not to let our closeness betray us. But the unease lingered. The cracks were showing. One evening, Aaron asked me to join him for dinner at a new restaurant in town, a rare occurrence given his usual workaholic tendencies. I agreed. I wasn't sure if my anxiety was more about leaving Dominic alone or about spending hours pretending everything was fine with Aaron. I've been feeling like we've grown apart. Aaron spoke cautiously over the appetizers. I frozen the glass of wine. He hesitated, swirling his drink. "I'm not sure if it's the stress from work, but it seems like your heart has been elsewhere lately." More guilt washed over me, but I forced myself to smile. "You've been busy. Aaron, maybe we just need to make more time for each other." He nodded, though his expression didn't lighten. The reprieve was short-lived. 2 days later, a package arrived in the mail addressed to Aaron. I found it on the kitchen counter when I came home from running errands. The sight of Alice's handwriting on the envelope made my heart plummet. I tore it open. With trembling hands, I retrieved a USB drive and a note from within. "You might like to see what your wife and son are doing." The implications were clear. Panic surged through me as I shoved the note and USB into my pocket. If Aaron had seen it first, I couldn't let myself think about what might have happened. I called CLA immediately. "She's still playing games," I said, pacing the living room. "I thought we scared her off," Claire said, her voice sharp with frustration, and so did I. "Do you think Aaron saw it?" "No. I got to it first." I responded, "We need to destroy it. Whatever's on that drive can't exist later that night when the house is quiet." I locked myself in the study and plugged the USB into Aaron's computer. My hands trembled as I browsed through the files, photos, and videos, revealing enough information to ruin everything if Aaron ever saw them. Despite my efforts to delete the files and smash the USB, Alice's determination to destroy us remained unrelenting. The next morning, I confronted Dominic. "She's still coming after us," I said, my voice tight with worry. His expression darkened. "I'll handle it." "No," I said firmly. "We need to end this for good." Dominic looked at me, his jaw tight. "How do we do that?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but we can't keep waiting." For her to strike, CLA came through again, digging deeper into Alice's life. Unexpectedly, she revealed that Alice had faced embezzlement-related termination from her previous job. With this new information, I devised a risky plan. Dominic and I arranged to meet. Alice was at a motel on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. She arrived late. With a smug expression, Alice sauntered into the room and asked, "Miss me?" before dropping her purse onto the bed. "We've finished playing games," I said, maintaining my position. Her smirk faltered. "Oh, are we? That's cute." Dominic stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "We know about the money you stole from your last job. We know." Everything Alice's confidence wavered, but she recovered quickly. "So what do you think? Anyone's going to believe you? You're the ones with something to lose, not me." I pulled out a folder of documents that Claire had gathered, bank statements, emails, and a signed complaint from Alice's former employer. Alice's eyes narrowed as she snatched the folder. She hissed, "This is blackmail from my hands. It's leverage. I corrected you. Leave us alone, and this stays between us. But if you try anything else, this goes." When Alice saw the police for the first time, she appeared genuinely shaken. She threw the folder onto the bed and stormed out without another word. The relief was short-lived. A week later, Aaron confronted me in the kitchen. "Something's not right," he said, his tone cold and accusing. He asked, feigning ignorance, "What are you talking about?" He said bluntly, "I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him. My blood ran cold." "Aaron, that's ridiculous. Is it he snapped?" "Because I don't think it is. I think there's something going on, and I want the truth." I felt the walls closing in around me. "There's nothing to tell," I said quietly. But Aaron didn't believe me. His accusation lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. His eyes bore into mine, searching for a crack in my defense. "There's nothing going on," I said again, forcing my voice to remain steady. "He's your son. How can you even think that Aaron didn't blink?" "I know what I see." "Bella, don't insult my intelligence." The suffocating tension in the room caused me, Richard, to lose my composure. I tried to redirect the conversation, asking if there was anything bothering you. "Let's talk about it, but throwing baseless accusations around is baseless." His voice is rose-cutting. "Me off? Then why is Alice saying otherwise?" My stomach dropped, Alice. Aaron nodded sharply. She called me and told me some things I didn't want to believe. Said she had proof. I took a deep breath. She's upset that Dominic moved on from her. She's trying to cause trouble, and you're saying there's nothing to her story. I held his gaze. Nothing. For a moment I thought he might believe me, but then he turned and walked out of the room without another word. His face pales, his movements tense. "What's going on?" he asked, closing the door. Behind him, Aaron knows something I said, my voice trembling. Alice must have gotten to him before we stopped her. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched into fists. What do we do? I don't know if I admitted it, but if he finds out the truth, he won't believe it. Dominic firmly said, "I won't let him." But I could see the fear in his eyes, mirroring my own. The next evening, Aaron insisted we have dinner together as a family. It was unusual for him to make such a request, and the formality of it made my nerves jangle. The three of us sat at the dining table, the clink of silverware against plates the only sound for long stretches of time, so Dominic Aaron said, suddenly breaking the silence, "How's the job search going?" Dominic, taken aback, looked up and responded, "Fine. I've been looking at a few opportunities." Aaron nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's good to hear. I was beginning to question whether you intended to stay here permanently." Dominic stiffened at the pointed comment. "It's not like I'm in your way," he said quietly. Aaron's gaze flicked to me, then back to Dominic. "I believe it's time for you to move on, don't you?" I opened my mouth to intervene, but Aaron held up a hand. "I think we've all gotten a little too comfortable with this arrangement. It's not healthy." Dominic stood abruptly. His chair scraped the floor. "If you've got something to say, just say it." Aaron leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. "Fine. I think it's time." My heart pounded for some honesty from both of you as Aaron's eyes locked onto mine. The room seemed to shrink around me as I tried to find the words to diffuse the situation, but before I could speak, Dominic stepped forward. He said in a firm voice, "There's nothing to say. Alice is deceiving. She is attempting to manipulate us as a result of our breakup." Aaron narrowed his eyes. wondering why Alice would involve Bella in her lies. She's desperate. Dominic said she'd do anything to get back at me and drag Bella into it. It was just the easiest way to hurt me. Aaron's gaze remained unwavering, and you expected me to accept Dominic's statement as fact for a brief moment. The room was silent. Then Aaron stood, his movement slow and deliberate. "Maybe it is," he said finally, "but I'm not convinced, and until I am, I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay." Dominic looked at me, his eyes filled with an unspoken question. I wanted to tell him to stay and fight this together, but I knew it would only make things worse. "It's fine," Dominic said quietly. "I'll go." The house felt emptier without him. Aaron seemed satisfied with Dominic's absence, though his suspicion toward me hadn't entirely dissipated. I called Dominic every day, though our conversations were brief. Our conversations were brief and strained. He had rented a small apartment on the other side of town and was trying to focus on work, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. "I hate this," he said one night. "Being away from you and letting her win is temporary," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. However, the distance was beginning to wear on me. Just when I believed the situation couldn't deteriorate, Alice took the decisive step. In the afternoon, while I was out running errands, Alice showed up at Aaron's office. She didn't have proof, but she had just enough of the story to sow doubt in his mind. When I returned home, Aaron was waiting for me in the living room. "Sit down," he said, his tone icy. I sat with my hands trembling in my lap as Alice came to see me. "He said she told me everything, or at least enough to make me question what you've been telling me, Aaron." "She's lying," I said quickly. "Is she?" He snapped. Because it's starting to feel like everyone's lying to me, the room was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he stood and walked to the door. "I'm leaving," he said. "Don't bother calling me. Until you're ready to tell me the truth, don't bother calling me." Aaron didn't come home that night or the night after. I tried calling, but he didn't answer. The house felt unbearably quiet, and for the first time I wondered if I truly lost everything. Dominic came over a few days later, his concern evident as he stepped through the door. "Are you okay?" he inquired, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I don't know," I admitted. He stayed with me that night. For a brief moment, things appeared to be improving, yet the harm had already occurred, and I understood our lives would never be the same.